Very much welcome to the next Flash Friday of the 15th of May in 2020. We're still in the midst of the Corona crisis, but slowly the light at the horizon is rising. And we've got a great session today again to talk about fintech development together with my special guest today, Nick Bortot from BUX. Nick, very much welcome.
Hi, good morning. Thanks for having me on your show.
Yeah, great. Thank you for joining. It's really nice to have you here. I think you're one of the big fintech successes in the Netherlands. But I think, and I also found it out again already in our preparation, you're very focused on developing your product and scaling up. So we don't always see you out that much. So from that perspective, I'm really happy that we got you to be available for this call. So we're looking forward to tell everyone a little bit about, of course, how BUX is doing, and we'll be going through the news of this week, and really curious to get your view on a couple of the developments that I think are worth mentioning.
Sure, amazing. Yeah.
Could you maybe nice to get a start for the people that are less familiar with BUX? Could you tell us a little bit about what you're working on?
Sure. So at BUX we want to be the single hub for everyone who wants to do more with their money, and so not putting your money on a savings account that doesn't give a lot of returns currently. But we want to offer everything from long-term investing to short-term trading, from doing it yourself to letting us do it for you. All around the investment space. So currently we have two apps. We have one app called BUX.The, which is a mid to long-term investment app. Users can invest in shares in Europe and also in the US soon without paying any commissions. So that's BUX.The, and then we have BUX.X, which is our derivatives app. That's an app that we launched 5 years ago. There people can trade for the short term. And then we have a third platform, which is our crypto platform, where it's very easy to buy and sell the major crypto. We're targeting the young people, the young at heart, and our ambition is to become the #1 neo broker in Europe.
And so I think that's a great ambition, and I think there's a lot of potential now, especially these days, as I think private investing is pretty much on the rise recently. Did you also see that? I've heard quite some companies come up with new numbers about retail investors flowing to the market. Did you also see that trend really coming up right now?
Absolutely. So our first quarter was our best quarter ever. It's a bit crude, obviously, to say, because there's a lot of negativity in the world now, and it's a bit of a weird side effect from this crisis. But there are companies benefiting from it, and we're amongst them. So we had a really good first quarter, and with our new product, our zero commission product, we were growing very, very fast already. And Corona is only accelerating that. And what you see is that a new generation of young investors is now entering the market and sees these markets as a once-in-a-decade opportunity to enter the market. So that kind of accelerates our growth, and it also accelerates the shift from traditional online brokerage to neo brokerage.
Yeah, because can you tell me a little bit more about the neo brokerage, right? So I think it's quite a new term. So how broad is that taken? So what kind of companies can we further see there?
Yeah, I'd like to draw a parallel to neo-banking.
Yep.
So over the past years, we've seen the rise of neobanks. Everyone knows those N26, Revolut in the Netherlands. Bank is a great example. They're doing very well. And these neobanks are not reinventing banking. They are repackaging banking, and they very well understand the needs of the younger generation. So if I look at how young people use technology and how they use their smartphones, they're used to a certain experience, whether they use Instagram or whether they use the Airbnb app or any app on their phone.
Yep.
And they want to see that same experience in financial products that they use. So if you look at neobanks, why are they so successful? Because they understand these needs and they come up with products that meet these needs, and they come up with features real quickly. Onboarding is very, very quick. So that's the rise of neobanks. And similar to this rise of neobanking, over the next years, you will see the rise of neo brokerage. And we already see this in the US, where Robinhood is getting tremendous traction.
Yeah.
You're going to see the same thing happening in Europe. And my expectation is that in a few years from now, we have 2 to 3 pan-European neo brokers that are basically that basically rule Europe, because you really have to be pan-European because this is a skill game.
Yeah.
And it's similar to neo banking, so it's all about the experience. It's not just about zero commission, because I think, like we see in the US, all brokerages are going to zero. So this will likely happen in Europe as well.
Yeah.
But it's much more about the entire experience.
Yeah. Yeah, I think so too, and I think that's really it's a really nice point. And do you see that? So what makes actually these neo brokers so much better at understanding this customer? Because I think that's of course the point is, you could think about everyone could dive into their customer and create an experience that matters. Where do you see the difference there? Do you actually need to, for example, have your hands free and sort of completely rethink the way it should work?
Yeah, so when I started BUX, on purpose, I did not hire ex-bankers or brokers. I'm, let's say, one of the older guys in the team, and I hired young people who kind of associate with this group of this target group. So that's very important. Secondly, you have to be super close to your customer. Basically, I really believe that back in the days there were the customers and there was the company, and nowadays this is one organism. And I mean, we have a very vivid community, even inside of our app. So people can talk to each other, they can follow each other, and we as employees of BUX, we're also very active in this community. So the feedback loop is super short.
Yeah, so but it's a complete different way of building a solution and a service for customers, actually, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. No, indeed, I think you mentioned already Robinhood, valued at $8.3 billion last week in their funding round that they announced. It's of course massive, but they were also already in the early days were mentioned as sort of the robo-advisory angle, right? So how do you see the link between robo-advisory and the neo brokerage firms? Because I can imagine that would come together at some point.
Yeah, but I mean, I think over the next years, a lot of things are going to come together. It's a spectrum. You also see that neo banks are starting to offer investment products, because it's a kind of natural extension. One of the things we're going to talk about today is our cooperation with N26.
Yeah.
So I mean, we're all targeting the same customer, and it's a spectrum from banking to brokerage to robo-advisory, and it's kind of obvious that you offer more products at this spectrum. The only thing is that it's not that easy to offer all of these products. I mean, you need to, every bank and every broker has basically is specialized in a certain part of it. So in order to offer great services, I mean, expanding your products too quickly doesn't really help. So but I think robo-advisory is a natural extension of brokerage. Absolutely. Not everyone wants to pick stocks him or herself.
No, exactly. But it's funny indeed that we basically saw this in a reversed development, right? So first we talked about the advice part, mostly with robo-advisory. And now you see it really going deep into the roots of the brokerage itself, which I think is interesting. And of course, it will at some point come together. Yeah. And you mentioned already the N26 collaboration that came out last week, I believe. So do you believe that more companies are going to collaborate in that kind of sense? So become each other's distribution partners, or how does that partnership work for you, for example?
Yeah, so if you look at the neo space, neo banking, neo brokerage, neo robo advisory, whatever, I mean, distribution is an essential part, because your margins are thin, so you need to acquire customers at very low prices, and therefore these deals are very important. I mean, mutually. So all big neobanks are teaming up with partners within fintech, but also with partners outside of the fintech world. I mean, they all have these partnership pages.
Yep.
And I think that really helps. I mean, together we create one ecosystem, and we basically are affiliates to each other.
Yeah, and it works nicely. Do you envisage more of those deals for yourself, for example, on other continents or other places, or do you have to focus on one of these players one by one?
So we're very focused on Germany currently. So in the Netherlands, we are the neo broker. In Germany, we're growing very fast, so that's why we're teaming up with the largest German player. But this summer we will launch in France. So we'll definitely look for partners who can help us to grow faster. Definitely.
Okay, yeah, cool. So I think it's funny to see also how these neobanks are currently doing, right? So I think if you also look at the last month, where there was a lot of uncertainty and a lot of funding deals, for example, got stalled, you still saw especially the neobanks on the rise. So indeed, N26 also announcing funding, Revolut telling very aggressively that they are on the acquisition path with their war chest of 700 million.
Yeah.
But also this week, for example, we get news like a Judo Bank in Australia got $170 million in funding. And for example, PicPay in Brazil, a large wallet provider that all of a sudden got 20 million users signed up to their platform. So it's funny to see how that's sort of getting an enormous uptake. I think what's interesting there is that I mean, there's a large potential for distribution because they seem to be very open to collaborate, right? Similarly to your deal with N26.
Mm-hmm.
So they could indeed sort of take with them this whole ecosystem of solution providers, right? I think that's quite interesting to see how that could go. Mm-hmm. Do you also look already beyond Europe at the moment for your own growth? Or is it really focused country by country at the moment?
It's not focused country by country. So our clear ambition is to become the number one in Europe, and by the end of next year we will be active all over Europe. So, but on the other hand, and that's actually quite funny. If you look at the States, for example, and probably I mean that it's a huge country and you need a huge budget to become successful there. Yeah. But Robinhood basically is the only real neo broker in the States. So I'm not saying we're looking at the States, but it's definitely interesting to think about it, and also to other continents. I mean, at the end, it's all about skill, like I said. We have the engine, we have the app, we have the team. We have a very international team, so we're 120 people at BUX, and we have over 35 nationalities. So from a technical point of view, it's not that difficult to also go outside of Europe. And I mean, you need a license, obviously, but apart from that, there's not that much that you need to do to become active in other countries.
No, especially if you can collaborate with partners that already have a vast network of potential users, right? So
yes, correct. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Cool. So I think it's interesting to see now how fintech sort of being basically really being in a bit of a in a challenge situation. So on one hand, you see part of the industry, like you were saying, really on the rise. So right, so they're really kind of just accelerating what is happening before the crisis. So I think that goes especially for investing, but you see the same thing in the B2B segment for banking platforms, fraud and anti-money laundering solutions, really things that people still really much need right now. Mm-hmm. They're doing very well because that's just continuing. But of course, you see also quite some areas where companies are struggling because they are actually more a long-term investment if you go into partnerships or if people are using it. it's interesting to see. So what's your view on that? So what do you think? Do you, for example, also have to look at your partners that you work with, for example, whether they're still doing well? I mean, it is still quite an uncertain time. So do you do extra assessment, for example, on the partners you work with?
Yeah, we work with them very closely, so we know them very well, and it's not like we're doing extra assessments. And if we would do them, then that would be hard to disclose that here. But I mean, we're constantly assessing partners, because at the end, technology is going so fast, and there's so many new companies popping up. So we're constantly looking at all kind of regtech companies, fintech companies. I mean, if you look at our stack, we cooperate with a lot of financial players and fintech players, and we're constantly re-evaluating them.
Yeah. No, I can imagine, definitely. It's interesting to see that there's also, of course, this angle now of fintech coming to the aid of other industries. So for example, companies distributing the government's state aid. It's interesting to see that there's, especially in the UK, it's very big. And for example, also in the Dutch market and in some other markets, it's very gradually starting, where alternative lenders are, for example, slowly beginning to distribute government aid to SMEs, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's just funny to see how there's just such a difference in the market between lending and investing, for example. Do you see there's more collaboration between the lending side and the investing side at some point? Or do you see, for example, alternative assets like alternative finance platforms being an asset class that could be interesting at some point?
Yeah, so yes, first to get back to what you were saying about fintech distributing government support, I think that's an obvious step. Fintechs are just quicker, more nimble, more agile than a lot of traditional players. So, I mean, I understand that it goes that way. Talking about corporations, a first step is to look at asset classes that are related to what we offer. So we were just talking about robo-advisory. I think that's a very natural extension of brokerage. We also acquired a crypto platform early this year. That's also an extension. Lending is not something we've thought about. Obviously, lending is interesting, because then you have both sides of the balance sheet.
Yep.
But I also very much believe in focus, and our focus now is really to roll out across Europe. I believe in doing small acquisitions or probably corporations, but I was also involved in the BINC Alex acquisition. That was, I think, 12 years ago, when BINC bought Alex, the two largest Dutch brokers. And doing large acquisitions is I mean, that can be very, very distracting, because there's going to be a lot of M&A over the next years. You were talking about robo-advisory, for example. I think from an investment point of view, the appetite for robo-advisory might be smaller, because the payback time for a robo-advisory customer is just much longer than for a brokerage customer. So there might be quite some M&A on the robo-advisory side. But as mentioned, we're careful with M&A, as this can also distract a lot.
Yeah, I can imagine. But from that perspective as well, is that as you see that there's so much collaboration possible, also without being owning everything.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to be limited, right? So it's really about the power play in the value chain, I would say.
Yeah.
Can I ask you something about, especially what you were mentioning, your crypto activities? We also still see that that's highly sensitive from a regulatory perspective. So still, central banks and other regulators really don't like the whole crypto space. Was it hard for you to actually be able to facilitate that? Because it's still seen as quite extraordinary.
I wouldn't say they don't like it. I mean, they're cautious, and rightfully so. As I mean, there is quite some money laundering happening in this space, so we have to be very, very careful. As you might know, there's regulation coming up in the Netherlands and in a lot of European states. In the Netherlands, it was postponed a little bit, but soon we'll be able to hand in our application for registration with the Dutch Central Bank. And for us, the fact that there is regulation now was actually a major trigger to do this acquisition. Because we're a regulated company and we feel very comfortable in moving into the regulated space. And the fact that it's regulated now feels good to us, first of all. And secondly, it also kind of gets rid of the let's say the players that don't have the interest of their customers. So yeah, in front of them. So yeah, we view it from a different way. And I mean, if you look at the people that we serve, so our BUX.X and BUX.0 users, there's a big overlap with the crypto community. They're all young people. They're very eager to explore new assets, and we want to offer them, but we do want to offer them in a secure and a responsible way.
Yeah, I can imagine. No, and I think it's definitely probably a really good decision there. And it is, of course, it is by now an asset class that you can't get. We won't be rid of it for a long time.
No, I don't think so. No.
And so, do you also actually see, if you look at your audience, is there a different than average risk appetite, because you work mostly with younger people that might have a different investment horizon or appetite than older people? Is that something you've investigated already at some point?
No, it's actually interesting, because I've worked at Bink Bank, the traditional online broker, for a long time. And back then I didn't see and we serviced clients back then who were like 45, 50 years old. And back then I didn't see a very different appetite. Probably younger people are even more risk averse, because they were brought up during the financial crisis or after the financial crisis. So they probably much better understand financial risk than the older generations. So they very carefully think about risk. And obviously not everyone is the same. So there are people who have a speculative mindset. Other people are very risk averse. You can't say that a certain generation is very speculative or very risk averse. It's also something individual.
Yeah, I also believe that it's very often not so much generational, but very often, but it can tie into your age, for example, right? So people at a student age behave a bit differently than people with kids, for example. So that's okay, but that's I think that's definitely interesting. So maybe then also to think about how you reach these people. So I think it was interesting also that this week, Ron Shevlin wrote a blog about how he sees that Google is becoming a really big fintech powerhouse. If you look at all the fintech building blocks that they're providing these days already to financial services companies and others. But of course, you see also that big tech firms like Google play an enormous role already in distributing distributing services and giving us access to the digital world. How do you see your relationship with parties like that evolve potentially?
Yeah, it's very simple. You can't get around them, right? So they're part of the infrastructure. I mean, we distribute our apps through the App Store and to the Play Store. So that's Apple and Google. We advertise on Facebook a lot. I think we're not in the Amazon cloud. Otherwise, we would have been dependent on Amazon as well. But you just can't get around these companies. I think it's good. We're actually on the Google Cloud, so that's another company we're dependent on. I think it's a fact of life. We as a fintech company, we have to focus on our own growth, and becoming less dependent or more dependent on these big guys. That's hard for us to decide. To be honest, I take it as a fact of life, and I think what's happening in Europe. I mean, governments trying to make sure that these big companies become a bit less powerful. I think that's a good evolution. because they start to become to act as kind of states. But on the other hand, we can't get around them, so we have to make the best of it.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Of course, very often people talk about them in a sense of a big threat. But then again, they're just new market entrants. And in principle, competition is something that should benefit the customer in the end. Of course, we have to figure out if actually the rules are facilitating a fair game with regard to competition. And I think that's where part of the struggle is. Because as they're not financial services companies yet, they have a lot of leeway to act where financial services companies are much more restricted in their game.
That's absolutely true.
Yeah. But I think it also probably tells us a bit more to the way that the whole digital ecosystem will be much more connected in total. And it becomes harder and harder to set aside the financial services industry from the rest of the digital ecosystem, basically.
Yeah. No, I mean, like 5 years ago, there was this. I mean, people said like these big guys are never going to go into financial services because they prefer unregulated industries. But I think financial services is so attractive, and secondly, they're smart companies. They have a lot of money, so it's inevitable that they will also enter the financial space.
Yeah, no, I think so too. I think that's definitely it's going to be interesting what the coming years are going to bring, especially with well, amongst others, PSD2 and GDPR being revised probably somewhere in the coming years to sort of indeed look at a more level playing field across the digital ecosystem, and how that's going to what kind of new opportunities and threats are going to rise up there. I think that's definitely quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we're almost already at closing time. If anyone has any questions who's on the call, please type them in the Q&A section so we can maybe squeeze one in. But maybe before we ended up, Nick, of course, as you're so close to the stock market, people are always keen to get a bit of an insight of someone who's so close as well. So I think yesterday you had Matthijs Bouwman, quite a renowned economist, sort of telling already that the initial V-shaped recovery that we anticipated on is not really getting off the ground. So it will probably be a bit longer downturn that we're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
But however, you see that the stock markets still have had a really strong recovery. And only this week, I think it seems like that recovery has slowed down a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, we never know. It might pick up again next week. How do you see that? Do you monitor, for example, the developments of the market yourself?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm fascinated by the markets, and I'm always on top of it. And now we realize that this quick recovery is probably not going to happen. You see that markets are going down over the past 2 days. My advice to everyone would be, I mean, I don't have a crystal ball, and it's the first time we have a pandemic of this size. So my advice would be I think it can be a great time to start investing. I'm not allowed to talk about advice, so I would please turn advice into suggestion. So my suggestion would be to, if you want to start investing, to don't invest all of the money that you have now at once. But let's say if you have 5,000 euros, then split it into 10 parts and invest every month or every 2 months, and then probably, and you need an investment horizon of at least 5 to 10 years, and then I'm sure that you might see interesting results. But please be careful.
Yeah, I think that's always a wise thing to do, because indeed, you never know. Just like we thought that oil would always be a good investment as well. We even saw oil prices go to negative.
Exactly.
Something that was never expected, I believe.
Yeah.
So you could indeed never tell exactly what will happen on the markets. I think it's 9:30, so we have to wrap it up. Nick, is there any last remark that you would like to share?
I'm very thankful that you invited me. So it was really great to do.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. It was a real pleasure to talk to you, and much luck with your conquest to conquer Europe.
Thank you, and likewise with Holland FinTech.
Great. Enjoy your weekend. Cheers.
Cheers, you too.